Okay, we're back. We're live. It's Thursday afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, and we have a very interesting show for you today here on Community Matters. I'm Jay Fidell, and the lady to my left is Reverend Pam Vessels. She's a minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and in the United Church of Christ. Did I get that right?
You did.
Welcome to the show, Pam.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And to her left is Doug
Upp.
Doug Upp, U-P-P, Up.
Yeah.
And he is, he describes himself as a sex worker voice.
Sure.
Speaking for the sex workers.
Speaking for myself,
Okay.
I am a sex worker, or I engage in sex work occasionally. So I'm just one person who does that is kind of silenced in the discussion about these kind of topics.
Okay. And we've called this show Sex Work in Hawaii, to get right to the point on it. That's pretty direct title for the episode. And the organization, I guess, that Pam would like to associate with is Harm Reduction Hawaii, which is actually a broad spectrum of things in Hawaii where the group would like to reduce harm. And I guess this is one of them, sex work in Hawaii.
Harm reduction is a philosophy, and the philosophy is that in whatever work you engage in, that you work with the people, number one, where they are, and that you listen to them intently and find out what it is that they want, not necessarily what you want for them. And so the one thing that you would always have to remember is that you do no harm, and that you help them to think about and to start to make decisions that will cause less harm in their lives or in the lives of the people that surround them. And that can be something very, very simple, like, for instance, teaching seniors to only use rubber-backed bath mats so they don't slip. Now, that's very simple, but that's one way to reduce harm. On the other end of that spectrum might be that you are giving or trading needles with injection drug users so that they do not infect themselves with HIV and that they don't then pass their needle on to someone else and infect them.
Can you help me with the definition of harm? I mean, how tall and broad is the word harm for this context?
Well, I think that as a clergy woman, for me, doing no harm is number one, because regardless of what, in my opinion, what I do in life, whether it's at work or at play, I do not want to be someone who does harm to myself or to someone else.
Harm is physical harm?
It could be mental, it could be physical.
Emotional?
It could be emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could be a great range of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it will be different with different people.
So you're a regular clergy person, a pastor, a minister for these two churches. How did you get into that, and how long have you been involved, and what is special about your congregations?
Well, I followed the path that most people follow into ministry. I felt a call to ministry. I went to college, graduated college, and then went to seminary. After seminary, I was ordained as a clergy woman, and I have served as a clergy person in every aspect of my life. As far as congregations, I was the associate pastor at First Christian Church here in Honolulu for 5 years. And I was the pastor at the Protestant Church at Kalapapa for 2 years. And but I also considered the 10 years that I worked on the street with sex workers as a part of my ministry, and so therefore just a part of my life. And I perceived my call to be to walk with people.
Walk with people.
To walk with
That's
people.
That's kind of a conceptual thing where You
Walking with
you
someone,
follow their lives, you help them going forward.
I'm a friend,
Okay.
and I walk with them. I don't judge them,
And you listen.
and I listen. Yes.
Yeah. So you're really an all-purpose minister. You range from one side of it to the other. Eh?
Does it all.
Well, I think when you are a clergy person, that you are called to do no harm, and that you are called to listen, and not just to listen, but to pay attention, and to do all things, if at all possible, in a kind and generous way. And that doesn't have anything to do with where you work, whether you work with sex workers and you walk the streets with them, or if you are the pastor of a church and you sit in the pew with your
And walk the
congregation.
streets with them.
That's true.
Yeah. So the title of our show is Sex Work in Hawaii. What is your connection with that?
For 10 years, I worked on the streets of Waikiki and sometimes downtown, but primarily in Waikiki. I was an outreach worker. I worked for the Waikiki Health Center doing a contract that initially came from the Center for Disease Control, doing HIV and STD education with sex workers and injection drug users. I worked 5 nights a week, all night. And during 5 years of that time, I was the executive director of a transitional facility for women and transgendered individuals who had made the decision to exit sex work.
And this is sort of part of this, it's got to be a significant part of your ministry because you spent a fair amount of time doing it.
It was my ministry,
Got
all
it.
of it,
Got it.
all of it.
Okay. You still doing it?
Well, I don't work 5 nights a week, all night out on the street anymore, but I'm still an advocate for sex workers. I still am involved in that community. I attend the national and sometimes international sex work conferences put on by sex workers. I'm an advocate for sex workers and am, up until just recently, I was on the board of Harm Reduction Hawaii. So I also maintain relationships with, give or take, 100 sex workers that I've known over the years.
Mm-hmm. So you're not with Harm Reduction Hawaii, I mean, not on the board anymore?
No, I haven't been on the board for a few months now.
Okay. So, you know, a point of curiosity, I should have mentioned it before the show, but David Ige recently vetoed a bill. I really would like you guys to tell me about that, but let me ask you first, Pam. What was that all about? Do you agree with the veto of the bill about sex trafficking?
I agree with the veto of the bill. And I think that one of the things that is vital to understand is the difference between sex work and sex trafficking. Unfortunately, these days, people tend to use the term sex trafficking to mean sex work. They're two entirely different things. And I think with the bill, though, that it set up kind of a two-tiered system. And I think the governor was very wise to veto the bill.
Interesting. Well, let's turn to you, Doug.
Hi.
You are a sex worker.
I've done sex work. I'm not doing it at this moment, but occasionally I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're interested in the same kinds of issues vis-a-vis
Yeah.
walking the streets,
I don't necessarily.
helping the sex workers.
Yeah. When I lived in Hollywood from like 90 to 94, and that's kind of where I kind of got introduced to things. And I just noticed that a lot of my friends, they were out there doing what they had to do, but they didn't necessarily know what could keep them safe or what would reduce the harm in their lives, like just having condoms on them, or things like that. Making sure you get the money up front, just ways to do it safely or, to make it mutually beneficial, not just let yourself be taken advantage of. I'm still learning a lot. I learn a lot from other people. I don't think I have all the answers, but I think that there has to be another voice out there that can relate to the issues that sex workers deal with when you're talking about sex worker laws or laws that affect them. You know, so there's that. I think one thing that David Ige, is that his name? One thing he did, I think that was that would help reduce a situation that someone might fall into trafficking, is that he signed into law that bill that let people change their gender on their birth certificate to match how they feel. So if you were assigned a certain gender at birth, but you know, at this point in your life you want to change it to reflect how you live, that is sort of a way to prevent someone from falling in a situation where they might be trafficked. Because trans people, if their birth certificate says something different, it's hard for them to find work, but they still need money. So there's, you know, people might do something else to get money, and it could lead to a risky situation for them. So I think Governor Ige helped in one respect, maybe unwittingly, but I think in practice it'll help reduce the numbers of people that might enter a situation they may not.
Are there organizations out there that represent sex workers in Hawaii?
In Hawaii?
Yeah, well, I mean, or nationally, whatever. You
There's
referred to some, Pam,
yeah.
but I wonder if there are organizations that are active here in Hawaii that represent and that try to help, specifically help sex workers.
I think there's some that try to help. I don't know if they necessarily represent them, but their clientele is, part of their clientele is made up of people in the sex trade.
It's interesting, you know, and it's a nomenclature question, but I think there's something behind it. I remember years ago, I attended it was a fundraising meeting by an organization that wanted to offer women, sex workers, an opportunity to leave the trade. Okay? And they were bent on that, and they had lots of scenarios and testimonials, if you will, about people who had left the trade and how easy or hard that was, and whether it was desirable and so forth. But you guys haven't mentioned that.
You didn't ask?
Okay, let me ask. I mean, is this part of our discussion today? Leaving the trade? Is this what you work for?
Not necessarily.
Well, I've been on both sides of that issue because for 5 years I did run a transitional house for people who chose to exit sex work. And I think that one of the myths is that every single person involved in sex work is somehow or another a victim, whether they realize it or not. And so a lot of people think that everyone involved in sex work, A, does drugs, B, they have pimps, C, they work on the street. And the reality is that only about 10% of sex workers work on the street. Most sex workers work off the internet.
Really?
They don't work out on the street. They work on the internet. They live in next door neighbors to you.
And they make their dates, so to speak.
They make their dates on the internet.
On
they
the phone,
they do it on the phone. They go on tour by setting up dates across the United States.
Social media.
Social media plays a big part in that, and so only a small fraction of sex workers are on the street. And so what you have is everyone like wanting to rush in and rescue all these poor sex workers who are being abused and have no rights and everything. Well, the reality is that most sex workers are adult consensual workers. Now, don't get me wrong, that does not mean
I mean, they're not in an imprisoned fashion. They're not owned by a pimp who requires them to do certain things under pain of punishment.
Majority not.
No, the majority are not.
I'm not denying that that is a possibility, but that seems to be the only kind of scenario that's projected out there. Whereas I've never been under anybody's control. I've been in control of most of the situations. I say no to what I don't want to do. I keep my money, you know. It's all kind of helped me out. You know, it's not everything that I love to do, but it's an option and it's quick money. If I want to go to a concert tonight, I just got to make a phone call, you know, and say, I need some money for tonight. You want to make me happy?
Right.
Okay, go on.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
You know, I mean, people don't think about all of the people that they consider regular people that are involved in sex work. I mean, I actually know people who have PhDs, who are professors in universities, who got their PhDs by doing sex work and who continue to do it at their whim when they choose to. I know a woman who's a nurse at Queen's Hospital who dates to make extra money. I've known people who are any given profession that you can think of.
So this is different than it was, right? I mean, I get the feeling that what you're
different than what you
describing
know.
is the modern 21st century version of sex work, and you know, the freedom that you could theoretically have using the internet and otherwise to do sex work as a kind of part-time gig.
Yeah.
Or full-time gig. And also I think that I take exception to your word theoretically, because it's a fact that men and women
And trans people.
all over the world do sex work and always have.
So my question, though, is what's the sea change on this? Was this the same way 10 years ago, 20
Yes.
years ago, 30 years ago?
I know it's been the same way since I became involved with sex work in 1987, and it's been that way ever since then.
And what about public perception? I mean, you've alluded to that, both of you. You know, the public doesn't know what really goes on.
It's an underground economy.
It's a parallel universe.
Yeah, and it's
Parallel
criminalized.
universe,
So
yeah.
the only representation you have is Hollywood, or you know, other people that have strange perceptions about sex in general. And they're the ones that are dominating the conversation and putting out these weird narratives out there that we don't deny exists, but there's so much more out there. You know, I used to work out of this one gym that I worked, you know, at, and so that's how I would make my dates. I didn't have to get on my phone. People would just come up to the counter and, you know, say, "What are you doing after work?"
Yeah.
And so it's not brand new. It's just an idea that's been suppressed, and since it's criminalized, people aren't going to come forward and, you know, explain their life, because that's going to incriminate themselves and perhaps put them in, you know, to harm's way.
So it's very interesting. So actually, people who are ordinary people, next door neighbors, could be involved.
Oh,
yeah.
sure.
And the guy next door to them, the neighbor doesn't know. He had no idea.
Well, and the neighbor may be a client.
Well, okay, that's the other alternative, sure.
I mean, all these people involved in sex work are getting paid by someone. And who's paying them? Our fathers, our brothers, our grandpas,
Yeah.
our uncles, our priests, our teachers. Men pay them.
So there's a public reaction, I mean, to sex workers. You know, don't want to. I guess most people don't want to be involved. It's the parallel universe. It's not my universe. It's somebody else's universe. You know, it's I'm trying to look for the right word, but it's something that I don't want to be involved with. Put it that way. So the question is, has that changed? Are public reactions to sex workers now, in the year 2015, different than they were, say, in the year 2005 or 1995?
What I see is that, in general, the attitude about sex has changed.
Yeah.
And so across the board, people are having sex younger. They're more casual about having sex. People do wait till they get married to have sex. At least I've heard that.
That's your people. No?
But just teasing. But people's idea in general about sex has changed. Young people hook up and don't think anything about
Very
it.
temporary, yeah.
It's very temporary. And so I think you're right about the mores have changed. But I think the one thing that has not changed is that sex work is still illegal.
I want to ask you about that, but I think I want to take a break first.
Okay.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about the legal or illegal nature of sex work and how it works here in Hawaii, and how serious is the police effort and the prosecution about it, and how that affects people in the industry. From their point of view, I'd really like to discuss that with you, okay? We're going to take a short break. I'm Jay Fidell. This is Community Matters, because community does matter. We're talking about sex work in Hawaii with Reverend Pam Vessels and Doug Upp. We'll be right back.
Right on. Cool.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? That's Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell, having my consciousness expanded by this discussion. We haven't had a discussion like this on ThinkTech before. Cool. That I'm aware of, and this community matters because it's definitely a community matter, and we'll talk about this later about how it affects all of us one way or the other, and we'll talk about sex work. But I wanted to ask you, the problem for everybody involved in sex work on all sides of it is it's illegal. It's still illegal. Nobody made it legal yet. Marijuana, that's legal, mostly.
Bravo.
But sex work is not legal. And yet, as you say, Pam, the nature of the sexual engagement has changed. And you can have a hookup or an afternoon gig. And you can do this for a few bucks anytime. And I think a lot of people who hook up are an inch away from taking money for it. Or maybe it's part of the deal. And so the line is blurred, I would say.
The line's blurred. I mean, if you took me out on a date and bought me dinner.
What's the difference? Yeah. Or if we had our date at dinner and you said, I need a few bucks, we've had a nice time. Could you lend me a few bucks? With the intention of never repaying,
Donation.
What exactly is the difference there? Can you help me out with a few bucks? And so, it's hard, and it's certainly hard to prosecute. And I really wonder, we see media portraying this all the time, and sometimes, putting the wrong spin on it. I mean, maybe often putting the wrong, and public reaction may not be accurate, may not see the parallel universes that you were talking about. But my question is, how do the police feel about it? Do they do anything? Do they do too much, too little? Are they being helpful? Is the criminalization of this activity a useful part of our system? Should we decriminalize it?
Yes,
how do we deal with this? In a larger sense, again, for the benefit of the community, because community matters. What are your thoughts about that?
I think we should decriminalize it, but I think one major thing right now that I'm kind of tripping on is I think it's all about voices, vocabulary, and visibility. So just having someone who is, that does sex work, getting to talk about it and in relation to laws that are going to directly affect myself or someone like me, and then visibility and just being out there, people seeing that, I don't have to dress in lingerie to make my money. And vocabulary, I think a lot of people misunderstand a lot of the terminology. They don't.
Example?
Well, legalization and decriminalization. Those are two different things, but a lot of times when people are talking about it, they don't realize that legalization means there's something legal, there's a law there. When decriminalization means you remove the laws that made something illegal. So whatever law there is against taking money for sex or paying for it, that would just remove those laws. It wouldn't eliminate anything else about kidnapping, rape, drugging people, or any kind of abuse. You would just take away the law that makes it illegal for someone to engage.
For consenting
adults. For adults consenting, yeah. And so if you decriminalize it and make it not illegal, that opens up a lot of doors and makes it safer for somebody who might be under some kind of abusive situation, can go to the cops and not fear like, it's easier to arrest a prostitute than it is to go after somebody that's abusing them. So let's get this person who's saying they're hurt, you know, but they're already confessing to being in sex work, so we can get them on that.
Yeah.
It discourages people from seeking help when they need it. If you're in sex work and you need medical assistance or medical help, there's a lot of stigma when you walk in the hospital if they know what you do to make your money. And so you're going to be treated differently. And so with the law, you know, against it, it prevents people from really living their life and seeking the help that they need.
You agree with this, ma'am?
I do agree with it. I think that there are already so many laws on the books against pimping, against people who try to get children involved in sex work. And I think that no one wants to see anybody abused, whether it's a housewife or a sex worker. But if what you do as an adult means that if you seek help, you're going to be judged and therefore not treated respectfully because of what you do, I think that there's a problem with that. And I think that
It's hard to legislate that, though. You know, if I'm a police officer and I've had my career, my life up to a given point, focused on the stigma. It's deeply ingrained in my way of looking at the world. And your approach was to what?
Decriminalize
decriminalize
it. Take away
it.
the laws.
Can I take that out of the police officer's way of thinking? Can I make him look at it differently simply by decriminalizing?
Well, I think that the police officer wouldn't have a choice. The job of a police officer is to uphold the law. If the law was that if it's decriminalized, the police officer can think whatever they want to think about what it is you're doing. But if there's no law against it, they can't bother you.
Right. And he should enforce other laws.
You should enforce the laws that are on the book.
Protect the sex worker from being harmed.
Well, in my opinion, they should be protecting sex workers from harm, period.
Yeah.
But I think that the reality is that if you are a sex worker and you are raped or beaten up or your money is stolen, whatever, you're going to be a lot less likely to approach the police.
If it's criminal.
If it's criminal, because you're doing something that's already illegal.
Yeah. So, has there been an effort in Hawaii to decriminalize sex work? Is there any organization that's seeking that? Anybody lobbying for that?
Somebody
Well,
for governor.
I think that there have been efforts to decriminalize sex work, and I think it's a big leap. And the big leap is that people have all these myths around sex work. And the biggest myth is that everyone involved in sex work is a victim, whether they know it or not. And to me, that takes away the right of a woman to have free agency over her body. So as an adult, I should be able to make that decision. And it shouldn't be anybody else's business.
So I should be able, or men, I should be able to decide that I want to go into this industry, make a buck in this industry.
Sure, if you're an adult.
Yeah.
And, okay, so you know, I guess the problem...
Thousands of people make that decision
they do
all
make that
the
decision,
time.
and and
It's empowering.
and the police don't necessarily know about it, so they just do it with essentially with impunity.
That's right. They live their lives one day at a time, just like everybody else. They get up in the morning, they get their kids ready to go to school. If they have kids, you know, they shop at the grocery store, they go to the movies. I mean, they do everything that everybody else does because they are everybody else.
Okay, but you know, let's get to the question of age for a minute.
Age?
If I'm young, and I have some experience having observed this in a given family. So now, divorced wife, a couple of kids, and they're post-pubescent, and they're on the street. And every time things go bad at home, they're back to Waikiki on the street, and their children What do we do about that?
Well, I think that's a different subject than sex work.
Yeah.
I think that if
It's
you...
just sex work by younger people, that's all.
That's something else. We're talking about adults making decisions for themselves. These are
Okay,
kids
so
in
in
a
this discussion, you're
disadvantaged
building in
situation.
the notion that it's an adult.
We're talking about adults. If you want to talk about kids, we can talk about kids, but that's something else.
It's
There's
something
kids
else.
that do it on the street as survival sex. If you want to help the kids, ask them what they need. Ask them about how damaging the foster care system is. Ask them how damaging it is to live at home. Ask, you know, the things, there's gender issues, there's poverty. There's reasons that kids, you know, if you think you're rescuing somebody and then arresting them or putting them back into a system that they're running away from to begin with, you know, it's not about your agenda. It's not about what you want. Talk to these people. Don't talk about them. Don't ask questions, you know, about what is best for them. Ask them.
What do you say if this kid, say the kid is 13 years old, approaches you and says, well, you know, you guys are discussing sex work. I have done that. I like doing that. I want to continue doing that. I feel like I'm an adult. What's your advice to them?
Well, I think that children don't need to be doing sex work. I think
What would you say
children
to
need
that child?
I would say that you need to be in school. Personally, I think they should be in school.
Ask them what to put them
But I would want to know, like Doug said, why are you here? Why aren't you at home sleeping in your own bed? Tell me about that. I would want to know about that.
So you go to the root causes.
Yeah,
Of
it's all about
course, of
that.
course.
Because you know, although, I mean, what I get from you guys is that, in your view and in the view of many people, sex work for an adult is an acceptable occupation. Can be an acceptable occupation. I mean, there are certain risks that may not exist for other occupations, but, you know, assuming put those risks aside, it's an acceptable occupation. So what about this kid who comes to you or who you have contact with, and he or she says, you know, I like doing sex work, and I want to do it after I turn 18, as an occupation. What do you say to that?
I would say, we'll talk about this after you turn 18.
I think well, there's like a group called Youth Outreach.
Yeah.
There are services out there that deal with kids, you know, that can help, you know. I'm not prepared to do that. I'm here to talk about myself. I'm not here to be anybody's role model or tell them how to live their life. But if they're coming to you and telling you that, just listen to what they say. But try to find out, why are you on the street? Because you don't have a place to live? Were you kicked out because you're queer or something like that? Or you have gender issues? Are you poor? Are you being abused at home?
Well,
like,
I'm sure there's plenty of that.
Well,
right?
of course. So then find out what it is. Don't just, you know, you're making like a strange situation where we don't have all the details, so I can't give you an answer to your question because I don't have all the details. So you have to get all the information before you can actually give somebody advice. So I can't really answer your question because I don't know this hypothetical person.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's what you have to do, and that's what's not being
shows
done.
all the time
Yeah.
about the social safety net and trying to deal with
Yeah.
poverty, trying to deal with homelessness, trying to deal with families that are breaking up. But suppose I withdraw all those, you know, troubled causes, and I have a middle-class kid whose family takes care of him or her, and who lives at home and goes to school, and once in a while goes out, gets hooked up, and he's a minor.
Well, I think maybe there's a little bit of a difference in what we're using as hookup. A hookup generally means just that two people have sex.
Yeah, on a short-term
There's no
basis.
money.
Yeah.
There's no money involved. It's not an act of prostitution.
Well, let's put money in the equation and say that it's a hookup with money.
I'd say harm reduction. I mean, you can't judge somebody. Telling somebody to stop smoking is not going to make them stop smoking. Telling somebody to stop being addicted to drugs doesn't mean that they're going to stop being addicted to drugs. So if somebody's trying to make money or whatever, you're actually talking about teen sexuality, but that's something else. We're not talking about that.
I'm going back to my own experience with this one family, where these two young girls who were way less than 18 were yo-yo back to Waikiki every time they could in order to support themselves. And they were children.
In order to support themselves.
Yep.
So then I would want to know, why weren't their families supporting them?
You have to go to the
That's a
cause
good
of something,
question.
then you can't just attack the effect.
I guess the point I draw out of all of this, it's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
There's a lot of players on the stage here.
Like I said at the
They
beginning,
come
I don't
from
have all
all
the answers.
backgrounds,
So.
and they all have different reasons. And
I think the main thing, though, regardless, whether you're dealing with a young person involved in sex work or an older person, is that you don't make it harder for them. You reduce the harm in their life. You know, if you know someone is having unprotected sex, you give them a condom.
yeah.
Okay?
So, as a minister, when you deal with sex workers in Waikiki or anywhere, you're trying to prevent them from harming themselves, or prevent them from being in a position of harm, however that might happen. You don't want them beat up, you don't want them raped, you don't want them to get sexually transmitted diseases.
I don't want that to happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Period.
But you worked in, in Waikiki, I guess,
I did.
with the notion of helping people in the sex work industry, right? So,
And I provided them with condoms, and I provided them with lubricant, and I provided them with education. I taught them about their bodies, how they worked. I taught them how to use harm reduction techniques to get out of difficult situations, how to think about things in a little bit different way. I put out a newspaper for them, and in the newspaper we talked about all kinds of things, about abuse, whether the abuse was from a facilitator, i.e. your pimp, whether it was from the police, whether it was from a family member, a client, it didn't matter. We talked about those things. We talked about their spirituality and their spiritual journeys. We talked about drugs. What are the effects of drugs? We talked about their children, how to be better parents, all of these things that would help them to become the best human being that they
although
could
this
be.
might still be in the sex industry.
It might still be in the sex industry, but that doesn't keep you from being a wonderful human being.
Yeah.
Well, but what I get out of this, I'm just looking, I'm an outsider to this, but let me just offer a reaction, okay? Is that when you go down there and you work to help people in the sex industry, the harm, if you will, I'm sure you're in the same place on this, the harm can be real serious. I mean, a sexually transmitted disease these days, AIDS, that's real serious. And getting beat up, getting raped, getting abused, that's real serious. It's a great risk. And so when you go down there, you want to help people, obviously. You want to help them avoid harm that would not necessarily befall an average citizen.
Well, I beg to disagree with you
It's okay,
on that.
that's what we're here for.
Because everyday, ordinary people, whether they're involved in sex work or not, are raped and abused every single day. And that's a really sad indictment about our society, that we don't treat each other very well. And so it doesn't make any difference if you're an attorney or a clergy person or a sex worker. No one has the right to hit you, to rape you. No one has that right. And you have the ability to protect yourself as best you can from those situations.
But would you say somebody in the sex industry needs a different, maybe a more intense kind of help than the ordinary non-sex worker person?
I disagree with that because
every situation is different. Like, I need different help than other people do. So you can't just say a sex worker. Specific people maybe, but just generalizing is part of what the problem is that everybody has this one perception of, sex work and sex workers, that they try to approach the problems with just one mindset and not realizing that there's so many other issues that could, if you're trying to help somebody out of sex work and they're treating them like a victim, but they're not victimized, they just need, to make money to pay for daycare so they can go to their day job and keep their kids somewhere safe. You gotta talk to each individual person. Maybe there'll be maybe a lot of them will have things in common, and you can develop a program around the commonalities, but don't approach each person with one
No,
idea.
you want, yeah.
So that's the thing, is that when you're saying a sex worker might have more risk than a normal person, I don't have as much risk as a construction worker does. But we're not trying to get rid of the construction industry. Harm reduction is giving them a hard hat and steel-toe boots. So that's harm reduction, knowing that somebody's going to do something and finding a way to reduce the harm to them. Football players, you can't stop kids from playing football, but you give them a helmet and all this like accoutrement, to make them safe. Same thing, I go to rock concerts, now I wear earplugs. That's harm reduction. So you look at each individual situation and come up with a solution to make it less harmful for them.
Okay, but when you spend 10 years helping people on the street, that was a choice you made in your ministry.
Yes.
As an ordained minister, and you put the time into that instead of why that instead of just being a minister in the ordinary course.
Well, I think everyone has a different calling in life, regardless. I mean, perhaps yours is being on the radio. Okay, so why did you choose to be on the radio instead of choosing to be a rocket scientist? Okay. I mean, I think that my call was to walk with people on their journey and to hold their hand if necessary. Maybe to even give them a boot down the street if necessary. But to be there as a friend and a confidant and to work with confidentiality with people. And I think that I need to say something about your comment about sex workers being more likely to get HIV or STD or something like that. And I don't think that's true because your average sex worker uses a condom.
It's our job to know.
It's their job, and they do their jobs well, and they protect themselves, and they teach their clients about safer sex. It's the 22-year-old guy who goes to the club, smokes a joint, pops a pill, does whatever they do, dance, have a good time, drink a few margaritas, maybe 10, meet some drop-dead wonderful girl, go home, have sex all night, and get up in the morning and like, condom? Oh my God, I'm a condom.
Yeah. Maybe you should,
oh my
maybe
God.
You should talk to him, Pam.
Well, that's just
people need to
it.
know. That's part of the thing.
That's right.
Harm reduction.
That's harm reduction. That's teaching people. But see, everybody has it in their mind that there is this way to be.
Let me ask you one last question. We have a minute or two left, and I told you I was going to ask you this, and that is, you guys are in a sort of special, a special area of the community. So there's parallel worlds, and you're in. Okay. So what about the other side? I told you I was going to ask you, why should the other side care
What's the other side?
about this? The people who have nothing to do with the sex industry.
Because they may not know that they have something to do with the sex industry.
I mean, what I'm really asking is, how does the whole universe that you're talking about, how does this affect our society, one way or the other?
Well, it affects our society because the people involved in sex work are the people we love. They're our children, our grandchildren, our sisters, our mothers, whoever. The people on the other side of the equation who are paying sex workers are also people that we love.
Regular people, yeah.
They're regular people, and
people
so
have sex.
People do have sex, and you know what? They pay for it too, and so there's this whole world out there, and to think that it doesn't affect everyone is not to see the issue.
It's still part of your life.
It's still part of all of our lives, whether we know it or not.
So let me ask you, to address our audience, okay? And tell them what you would leave them with about this, how they should see this, how they should conduct themselves, how they should see the people who live in the sex industry world and who help the sex industry world and who are touched by the sex industry, how should they see that? How should they change their view of it after watching this discussion? Okay, there's the camera right there. Okay, so you're talking to them now, Pam.
Okay, Pam. Tell them all.
I think that we need to stop believing all the myths about sex work. We need to start thinking about it in a different way. We need to look at real numbers instead of fake numbers when it comes to people involved in sex work. We need to stop equating trafficking with sex work. It's not the same thing.
It's not.
And we need to realize that sex workers are the people that we love. They're our children, our grandchildren, our nieces, our nephews, our cousins. And that the people that pay sex workers are also people that we love. They're our husbands, our boyfriends, our grandpas, our preachers, our teachers. It's all about humanity, folks, and about walking with people and doing no harm as you walk with them.
Doug?
I mean, like I said at the beginning, I'm still learning a lot, you know, but I think that's what a lot of people have stopped doing, is learning. They think they have the answers, and so they just move forward with that. But there's still so much to be learned, and you can't learn if you stop listening to people, and that's part of why I'm here, just to talk as a sex worker, not for sex workers. But I'm one person, and whatever laws that people want to push right now, they're not really helping me. They may not even be affecting me because I don't work on the street, you know. So, but like a lot of the laws that are against sex work are disproportionately affecting people that work the street, and they're the most disadvantaged. They're they're the least empowered because they're visible. They don't necessarily have the ways to do it invisibly. And so I think it just has to, people have to start learning and listening to voices. There's people like Jess Richardson and who else? Melissa Guerra Grant, and just there's a lot of women out there that are doing a lot of stuff. But there's not only women that are involved, there's not only women that are sex workers, but just the fact that the conversation focuses around women shows that there's so much more to learn and so much more to cover, that and it's disempowering to women to say that they can't make this decision for themselves. Where as a guy who does it, and sometimes I do it in drag, people are not surprised. They just think that mahoos and fags, we're gonna do what we want, you know? But a woman can't make that decision for herself. What is that saying about your attitudes about women? You know, that they're only victims, and you won't listen to them unless they play a victim role. And that's part of the big problem, is just not listening to people and not being willing to learn from people who don't have don't cater to your preconceived notions about what's going on.
We have a comment on Twitter, and this we got to close with it, from Mark Ward.
Yes.
He writes, so many of us could learn from Reverend Vessels' non-judgment and meeting people where they are. For me, that is God in action. Bravo.
Amen.
All right.
Praise the
okay,
Lord.
You guys. This has been a very unusual discussion, and I hope it has helped somebody more fully understand our community and our society and the way things are changing in the 21st century. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Jay.
you.
Pam,
Yeah,
Doug.
cool.
Aloha.
Right on.